Hello, my dear friends. Never had a proper bath in their lives. It sounds horrible. But that was the truth for millions of women in the Middle Ages. There were no baths, no soap, and no hot water running from the tap. Personal hygiene was considered a luxury, sometimes even taboo. So how did they live? How did they avoid being considered dirty in the community? And did everyone smell as bad as people thought? Tonight, we step into their quiet routines of wiping, rinsing, and surviving without a single real bath. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing background, and let's embark on this journey together tonight. If you think skipping a shower today feels uncomfortable, then life in medieval Europe would be a big adjustment. In most homes, especially in the countryside, women had no separate place for bathing. Houses were simple. Many families lived in just one room, where they ate, worked, and slept. There was no indoor bathroom. There was no private space for cleaning. There were no sinks, no faucets, and no plumbing. Every act of personal hygiene had to be done by hand, often in the open or behind a curtain, using cold water from a bucket or basin. When a woman wanted to bathe, the process began with carrying water. Water had to be fetched from a nearby stream, well, or communal source. That meant walking with heavy wooden or clay buckets. If she wanted warm water, she had to boil it over a fire. That took time and fuel. Firewood wasn't always easy to gather. Poorer families often relied on scrap wood or dried twigs collected from roadsides. Once the water was ready, it was poured into a wooden tub, usually round and shallow, placed in the centre of the room or outdoors behind the house. Bathing didn't happen often. Heating water, finding privacy, and cleaning up afterward were too much work for everyday life. Most women only bathed once every few weeks, sometimes once a month. In cold weather, they avoided it altogether. Warmth was saved for survival, not comfort. Fire was used for cooking and staying alive, not for filling bathtubs, so bathing became rare and carefully planned. A woman might wait until a major holiday, after childbirth, or before a religious event to finally wash her whole body. Personally, I think that if I had to fetch and boil every drop of water myself, I'd skip bathing too. When it was time to bathe, it usually happened in the main living space. The wooden tub was filled with warm water, if possible. The man of the house bathed first, then the older boys, then the younger children. Women bathed last. By then, the water was dirty and lukewarm or cold. It didn't matter. That was the routine. No one questioned it. Privacy was limited. A curtain might be hung, or people might turn their backs. But the home was small. Everyone knew what was going on. In wealthier households, the situation was only slightly better. They might have more servants to carry water and more firewood for heating. But even nobles didn't have fixed bathrooms. Some castles had bathing rooms, but they were used only on special occasions. These rooms still required the same effort. Buckets of water, heated over flames, were carried up stone stairs. Bathing was always manual and slow. Public bathhouses existed in towns and cities, especially in earlier medieval centuries. These were communal places where people could soak, scrub, and even socialise. But over time, bathhouses became linked with disease, sin, and scandal. Some were shut down by church officials. Others simply fell out of favour. For women, especially married or high-status women, using a public bathhouse became risky. Rumours spread easily. A woman seen entering might be accused of improper behaviour, so most women bathed at home, or not at all. Instead of full baths, they wiped down their bodies using wet cloths. They focused on areas that felt dirtiest. The face, armpits, feet, and hands were wiped regularly. They used basins filled with warm water if they could get it. No soap was involved unless they were wealthy. Most used ashes, vinegar or herbal water. Towels were rough. There were no fluffy white cloths, no soft robes, and no scented lotions. These days, even a budget hotel has a private bathroom. In the past, a queen might have bathed in the same tub as her servants. Clothing helped manage hygiene. Women wore layers. The layer closest to the skin, usually a linen shift, absorbed sweat and body oils. That layer was changed and washed more often. Outer garments were reused for long periods. Washing clothes took effort. Too, each item had to be soaked, scrubbed, wrung out by hand, and dried in the sun. In winter, drying was difficult. Damp garments often froze or stayed wet for days. Hair washing was also rare. Women covered their hair with caps or scarves. They brushed it regularly and sometimes used vinegar or herbal rinses. A full head wash happened only every few weeks, maybe even less. Combing out dirt and lice was a daily task. Mothers often did it for daughters while sitting by the fire. It was quiet, repetitive work, done without fuss. It's a little funny that medieval society expected women to stay modest and clean, but gave them no tools or time to do it properly. Perfume was for the wealthy. Most women had no access to fragrance beyond herbs. Lavender, rosemary, or mint were dried and sewn into small sachets. These were tucked into sleeves or belts. A woman might rub a bit of oil behind her ears before visiting the market or church. That was considered enough. Cleanliness was measured by appearance, not scent. There was also fear around bathing. Some people believed that washing too often could make you sick. It was thought to open the pores and allow bad air to enter. Others believed water could weaken the body. These ideas spread through villages and even among the educated. So people saw bathing not just as a burden, but as a risk. Women adapted. They used cloths instead of baths. They kept their underclothes as clean as possible. They brushed their teeth with a cloth or twigs. They wiped their bodies with vinegar. And they did all this without much complaint. Cleanliness was not about feeling fresh. It was about staying presentable. That was the standard. In the evenings, a woman might sit quietly and wash her feet before bed. She might change into a clean shift and comb her hair. There was no mirror, no scented candle, just routine, just enough to feel prepared for sleep. And in the morning, it would begin again, fetching water, cleaning clothes, wiping faces, and combing hair. This was the rhythm of hygiene in a world without bathrooms. No steam, no privacy, no convenience. Next, we'll see what women did on days when even wiping with water was not possible, and how they stayed clean using nothing more than cloth, herbs, and memory. There were many days when the bath never came, not because women forgot or avoided it, but because it simply wasn't possible. When heating water took too much fuel, or the weather turned cold, or there were too many chores to attend to, full-body bathing was often skipped. But that didn't mean women gave up on keeping themselves clean. Instead, they turned to something more manageable. They wiped themselves down with a cloth. This method was practical. A small basin of warm water could be prepared with far less effort than a tub. A piece of linen, often a worn-out shift or towel, was dipped into the water, wrung out, and used to clean the skin. There was no need to undress fully, no need to move furniture, or wait until everyone left the room. A quiet corner and a cloth were all that was needed. The wiping usually followed a routine. Women began with their faces, then moved to their necks, underarms, hands, and feet. These were the areas that collected the most sweat and odour during the day. Other parts of the body were left untouched unless necessary, not out of laziness, but due to time, privacy, and resource constraints. It is reasonable. If you've already fetched the water, heated it, and found a quiet place, focusing on the parts that smell is a perfectly logical move. To improve the effect, women sometimes added herbs to the water. Rosemary and lavender were favourites, not for luxury, but for function. These herbs helped cover body odour and gave a faint scent that lasted for a few hours. Some also believed certain herbs had cleansing properties or could prevent illness. Whether that was true or not, it gave the act of wiping down a little more purpose. The cloths used for wiping were washed and dried after each use, if possible. In winter, drying took longer. Sometimes they were hung by the fire or wrapped and reused damp. If the clothes began to smell or feel rough, they were boiled or discarded. Many households had specific clothes just for this purpose, kept folded in a box or a drawer near the hearth. There was no mirror. Most women wiped themselves without ever seeing what they were doing. They relied on habit and touch. They felt for dirt, rough skin, or sweat, and cleaned accordingly. No one commented on appearance. Looking fresh was not the goal. Feeling manageable was enough. These days, we talk about self-care routines involving 10 steps and special creams. Back then, self-care was a bowl, a rag, and enough time to wipe your neck. This wiping method was used not just in place of bathing, but sometimes daily. In warmer months, it became part of the morning or evening rhythm. Women might rise early, heat a little water, and spend a few quiet minutes wiping themselves before dressing. It didn't take long. It didn't leave them fully clean, but it helped. Young girls learned this from their mothers. There were no books, no printed instructions, and certainly no public conversations. It was something you picked up by watching, helping, and listening quietly. A girl might be asked to heat the water, fold the cloth, or carry the basin. Then one day, she would be expected to do it herself. Wiping down also meant dealing with the fabric of the body. Long hair had to be pulled out of the way. Layers of clothing had to be loosened, shifted, or temporarily removed. It was done discreetly. A shawl hung over a chair, a skirt raised just enough, always controlled, always quick. Women with servants had more help. A trusted maid might prepare the water, bring the herbs, and even assist with the wiping if needed. But even then, modesty ruled. A lady might allow someone to wash her feet or rub her back, but never beyond that. The rest remained private. Women guarded their bodies from view, even among other women. There was no perfume, no body lotion, and no cleansing wipes. Only warm water and a cloth. Sometimes, a second basin was used to rinse, but most times, one bowl had to do, and even that was better than nothing. It's a little funny to think that wiping your armpits with rosemary water was once considered good hygiene, but today we have electric toothbrushes that connect to smartphones. On days when there was no water, women relied on dry wiping. They used clean cloths to brush off dust or sweat. A pinch of flour or ground herbs was sometimes rubbed onto the skin to absorb oils. Then it was brushed away with a soft cloth or a piece of wool. This dry method didn't feel refreshing, but it kept things under control. In summer, wiping helped avoid rashes. In winter, it kept the skin from drying out too much. Either way, it was a compromise. Better than nothing. Not perfect, but enough. At night, the clothes were folded again. The bowl was rinsed or left near the hearth for the next morning. Nothing was wasted. The water might be used to mop the floor or soak laundry. The herbs were dried for reuse. Even the smallest routine had its place. It wasn't just about dirt, it was about control. In a world where many things were unpredictable, wiping your own arms and face gave a sense of order. It was one of the few acts that belonged fully to the woman herself. No one could take it away. This method lasted for centuries. Even after plumbing arrived in cities, many rural homes continued with a cloth and a basin. It was familiar, affordable, and required no explanation. Wiping became part of daily life, not a temporary substitute for something better. Looking back, it's clear that medieval women didn't view hygiene as a full transformation. They saw it as maintenance, something small they could manage, often while others were still asleep or while the stew simmered on the fire. They didn't chase the idea of being spotless. They chased comfort and routine. Next, we'll explore how washing the hair fits into this routine, and why the head was often left untouched for weeks at a time. While wiping down the body became the most common way to stay clean, hair care was treated very differently. For many medieval women, washing their hair was not part of the regular routine. In fact, it was often avoided for weeks at a time. There were many reasons for this, and none of them had to do with comfort. Washing hair took time, resources, and effort that most people simply didn't have. Unlike a cloth wipe, washing the head meant getting it fully wet, which was risky, especially in cold weather. Water ran down the neck and into the clothes. Hair took hours, sometimes days, to dry completely, especially in winter. Most homes had no way to heat a room just for drying off. Sitting around with damp hair was not just unpleasant, it was considered dangerous. People feared cold air getting into the body. Wet hair was linked to illness. As a result, many women washed their hair only when they had time, warmth, and privacy. That usually meant once every few weeks. Some went even longer. When the time came, they followed a process. First, they heated water in small batches and poured it into a bowl or basin. Next, they used simple materials to scrub the scalp. Soap was rare, so they turned to homemade substitutes. One method was to mix vinegar, especially apple cider vinegar, with water and use it as a rinse. It cut through grease and left the hair feeling lighter. Another method involved dried flowers or herbs. Some ground dried chamomile or lavender into powder and rubbed it into the scalp. Others made a sort of paste by mixing dried petals with water. This wasn't about luxury. These plants were chosen because they were accessible and smelled better than unwashed hair. Personally, I think if my shampoo options were vinegar or flower dust, I'd start braiding my hair and never look back. After cleaning, women would rinse their heads carefully, usually with more warm water if they had enough. Then came drying. This step required patience. Without towels as we know them today, women used linen cloths to wrap and blot their hair. They sat near the hearth or under the sun, letting the air do the work. For busy women, this wasn't practical. That's why many skipped washing entirely and turned to other methods. Instead of washing, they brushed and combed their hair regularly. Wooden combs were common, and some women added a little oil to reduce tangles. Brushing was a daily task for many, especially before bed. It kept the scalp stimulated, removed loose hairs, and helped distribute natural oils. A woman's brush or comb was personal. It was stored carefully, sometimes in a cloth bag, and rarely shared. Hair was usually braided or covered. Loose hair was rare outside the home. Braiding helped prevent tangles and kept dirt out. Covered hair stayed cleaner longer. Scarves, veils, or linen caps were worn daily. These weren't only for modesty or fashion. They were a way to keep dust, smoke, and sweat from settling into the hair. Some caps were plain, others were embroidered, but their function was the same. These days, people panic if they miss a hair wash by one day. In the past, skipping 3 weeks was completely normal. Covering the head also helped manage lice, which were common. Combing helped, but many women used herbal rinses to keep lice away. Some boiled rosemary or thyme and poured the warm liquid over their heads. Others wore small pouches of herbs under their caps. These didn't eliminate the problem, but they made life more bearable. Young girls learned these habits early. They helped their mothers brush hair, prepare rinses, and hang caps to dry. They were told to keep their hair neat, tied back, and clean as much as possible without washing too often. Girls with thick or long hair sometimes had it trimmed to make care easier. There were no salons, no hairdryers, and no products. Just time, cloth, and routine. Even noble women who had more resources didn't wash their hair frequently. They followed similar patterns. A lady might have a servant to assist with rinsing or combing, but the basic method remained. Wet hair was a risk. Dry brushing was safer. Clean appearances came from care, not water. Washing hair also depended on the season. In summer, it was easier. The sun helped with drying. In winter, many women gave up on it completely. Instead, they focused on keeping the scalp clean through rubbing, brushing, and herbal treatments. Washing became a seasonal task, not a weekly one. It's a little funny that in a time when hair was never washed more than monthly, people still cared enough to boil herbs just to keep it smelling nice. After a cleaning, hair might be oiled lightly. Some women used animal fat or plant oils, though these were used sparingly. They helped tame frizz and added a bit of shine. Then the hair was braided, coiled, or wrapped again. It stayed that way until the next round of care, days or weeks later. There was no expectation for hair to look bouncy, glossy, or styled. It only needed to be managed. That meant no tangles, no visible dirt, and no strong odour. Most women never saw the back of their own heads. They combed by feel, trusted routine, and moved on with their day. In rural areas, where dust and smoke were part of daily life, keeping hair under control was difficult. That made coverings even more important. A good cap could extend the time between washes and protect the hair from farm work, fire ash, or wind. A dusty braid was still better than a wet head in the middle of January. Hair was rarely cut short. Long hair was seen as normal and expected, especially for unmarried women. But length was not the focus. Neatness mattered more. A tidy braid or bun showed discipline. It told others that a woman took care of herself, even without modern tools. Looking at medieval hair care today might seem strange, even harsh. But for the women living it, these routines made sense. They saved time. They avoided illness. They kept a level of order in a world where little could be controlled. Next, we'll look at how medieval women handled menstrual hygiene, and what it meant to stay clean when the body followed a schedule of its own. After dealing with daily routines like wiping the body and brushing the hair, women still had to prepare for one of the most personal challenges of medieval life. Menstruation came regularly, but the means to manage it were limited. There were no pads, tampons, or menstrual cups. No disposable products. No instructions are printed on the boxes. Just time, fabric, and quiet adjustments were made each month with whatever materials were available. Most women used folded cloths during their period. These were small pieces of linen, wool, or other absorbent fabric, cut from old clothes or bed sheets. They were folded into rectangles or rolled into bundles and placed inside the underwear or tucked into layers of clothing. Some women had simple linen trousers to hold the cloth in place. Others wore no underpants at all, depending only on how tightly their clothes fit. The clothes stayed in place through friction and movement, and they were checked and changed as often as possible. For women who could not access cloth, soft straw, moss, or animal wool was sometimes used instead. These were shaped into a pad and wrapped in fabric, then positioned to absorb flow. This method was less comfortable and less effective, but still better than nothing. Absorbency wasn't the only concern. Irritation, odour, and leakage were constant risks. Personally, I can't imagine trusting a handful of straw to stay in place, let alone to get through a full day without trouble. After use, the cloths were washed. This was done carefully and in private. The water had to be heated, and the cloth scrubbed by hand. There was no soap as we know it today. Women used ashes, vinegar, or simple herbal rinses. Once clean, the cloths were wrung out and hung to dry, usually indoors. Women avoided hanging them in shared spaces or near windows where others might see. In larger households, the clothes might be hidden behind curtains or dried in locked rooms. Privacy was important, but not always possible. A woman might have to dry her clothes at night or store them under her bed. In small homes, every corner was shared. That meant women had to be creative in managing their hygiene without drawing attention. Some kept their clothes wrapped in layers of other laundry to mask stains or smell. There were no waste bins. Nothing was thrown away. Every cloth was reused. Some lasted months. Others wore out faster. Replacing them meant cutting into precious fabric, which most households couldn't afford to waste. Old shifts and aprons were often repurposed for this task. These days, we complain if a sanitary pad doesn't stick well. Back then, women were hoping the linen wouldn't shift while walking to church. Menstruation was not openly discussed. There were no lessons, no guides, and no formal knowledge passed from one generation to another. Girls learned what to do by watching their mothers or older sisters. The first period came with confusion, sometimes fear, and often silence. A girl was told what cloth to use, how to clean it, and what not to say. Shame was common. Understanding was not. Some families believed menstruation made a woman unclean. During her cycle, a woman might be asked to sleep separately or avoid the kitchen. In certain villages, she might not be allowed to bake bread, touch milk, or enter sacred places. These beliefs varied by region and by household, but the underlying idea was the same: the menstrual body was seen as different, even dangerous. Because of this, many women practiced extra hygiene during their period. They wiped more often, changed clothes more frequently, and stayed close to home when possible. They avoided lifting, climbing, or walking long distances. Some even stayed in bed for part of the day. This wasn't luxury, it was caution. In noble households, menstruation was handled with more support but still little comfort. A lady might have a maid assist with washing clothes or heating water. She might rest in a private chamber, but the materials were the same: linen pads, herbal rinses, a private corner of the room. Being rich didn't change the lack of options. Women tried to reduce the smell with herbs. They placed small bundles of rosemary or mint near their beds. Some rubbed vinegar or rosewater behind their ears or under their arms. Others used powders made of ground flowers or chalk. These didn't mask everything, but they helped. Clothing also played a role. Women often wore darker skirts or extra layers during their period. This helped cover any stains. Underskirts were chosen carefully, and some women had a specific set of clothes they used only during this time. These garments were washed separately and stored apart from other clothes. Accidents happened. When they did, women dealt with them quietly. A stain on a bench, a spot on a hem, these things were handled without fuss. There were no commercial stain removers, just water, ash, and patience. It's a little funny that for all the restrictions placed on women during their period, no one ever thought to make the cloths more comfortable or easier to use. In small communities, women sometimes helped each other. They exchanged cloth patterns, shared advice, or quietly passed along herbs that seemed to help with cramps. There was no medicine for pain, but some chewed on dried leaves or tied warm stones to their stomach. These methods offered little relief but gave a sense of action. The emotional side of menstruation was rarely addressed. Mood changes, fatigue, or discomfort were seen as part of life. Complaining was discouraged. A woman who rested too much or spoke too often about her cycle might be labelled lazy or strange. So most kept going, doing their chores and tending to their families, even when they felt weak. Girls grew up seeing how their mothers managed everything silently. They copied the same habits, they reused the same clothes, and one day they taught their daughters to do the same. The routine didn't change for generations. Despite everything, women found ways to stay clean. Not perfect, not effortless, but enough to protect their bodies and keep their dignity. In a world that often overlooked their needs, they made hygiene their own, one folded cloth at a time. Next, we'll look at how women learned about hygiene at all, and why many grew up with only whispers and guesses to guide them. By the time a girl experienced her first period, she had already seen bits and pieces of what adult hygiene looked like. But those glimpses were quiet, scattered, and often unclear. There were no guides to follow, no formal education, no school lessons, no printed books to explain how a woman should care for her body. Everything was passed down quietly, from older women to younger ones, in kitchens, beside beds, or near the fire when no one else was listening. Mothers and grandmothers became the only teachers. They didn't use instructions. They demonstrated through actions. They handed a cloth to a daughter, showed her how to rinse her hands, pointed to the basin, or folded a shift with extra care. Most of it wasn't explained in words. It was shown once, maybe twice, and expected to be remembered. If a girl was lucky, she had a mother who took time to teach gently. But that wasn't always the case. Some girls grew up with little guidance. If their mother was absent, busy, or simply uncomfortable talking about such things, they had to figure it out themselves. They watched, guessed, and copied what they saw. Mistakes were common, embarrassment was frequent, but asking questions was rare. Personally, I think trying to learn how to stay clean without being allowed to talk about it sounds harder than learning to cook without ever lighting a fire. Most women believed what their mothers told them. If their mother said that cold water was better than hot, they used cold water. If someone warned against washing during certain days of the month, they listened. These ideas were not questioned. They were repeated, preserved, and followed because there was no alternative. Over time, these habits became true in the minds of those who practiced them. Some women spent their entire lives cleaning themselves with nothing but cold water and rough cloth. They had never been told otherwise. The idea of herbal rinses or warmed basins might not have even occurred to them. Comfort was not the goal. Getting through the routine without making a mess or drawing attention was enough. These days, people look up everything online in seconds. Back then, if your grandmother didn't know how to clean something, you just stayed dirty. There were also strong beliefs tied to health. Many thought that washing too often would harm the body. Some were told not to bathe during their period. Others believed that touching certain parts of the body too frequently would cause illness. These ideas weren't based on science. They came from fear, tradition, and the church. But without education, women had no way to challenge them. The lack of instruction didn't just affect physical hygiene. It also shaped how women saw their own bodies. Shame was common. A girl might not know the names of body parts. She might think bleeding was a punishment or that body odour was a sign of sin. These beliefs could follow her for life. Without someone to explain, she carried quiet discomfort for years. In noble households, girls sometimes had governesses or wet nurses who offered limited guidance. But even there, modesty rules kept conversation shallow. Cleanliness was taught as obedience, not self-understanding. A girl was told to wash her hands, tidy her hair, and wear fresh linen. But deeper knowledge was rarely shared. In monasteries or religious homes, hygiene instructions were even more restricted. Silence was encouraged. Curiosity was discouraged. Women followed strict routines without knowing why. If a girl broke a rule or asked too many questions, she was corrected, not educated. This silence extended into adulthood. Married women often learned new hygiene practices from trial and error. No one prepared them for how to manage childbirth, nursing, or illness. They relied on neighbours, midwives, or older relatives. Sometimes, they passed on habits that were helpful. Other times, they passed on myths. Shared wisdom was the only real system. It wasn't organised. It wasn't always right, but it was better than nothing. It's a little funny that so many rules existed around modesty, yet no one thought to clearly explain how to clean yourself properly. Some women formed small circles of trust, a sister, a cousin, a close friend. They whispered tips. They showed each other how to fold cloths, prepare herbal rinses, or wrap hair before bed. These moments were brief and cautious, a shared task, a quiet exchange. Nothing written, nothing official, but valuable. The problem with oral instruction was inconsistency. What one woman believed was best might be considered harmful by another. One family used hot water, another warned against it. One village preferred rosemary, another swore by vinegar. With no books and no experts, everyone trusted their own version of tradition. As a result, hygiene practices varied widely. Even two neighbours might do things very differently. And if a woman moved to a new village or married into a new family, she often had to relearn everything. She was judged by different standards. What had once felt normal now seemed strange. Older women were respected for their knowledge, but not always questioned. Age gave authority, even when the information was outdated. A grandmother who had lived through many winters carried more weight than an herbalist with better advice. That meant some poor habits continued long after they should have faded. Girls with no family nearby had it hardest. Orphans, servants, and outsiders had fewer people to teach them. They watched others from a distance, picked up fragments of routine, and invented their own way of doing things. Some succeeded. Others lived in confusion and discomfort. Despite these challenges, many women found their rhythm. They took the pieces they were given and built their own systems. They kept their clothes folded a certain way. They stored herbs in the same spot each month. They turned habits into routine, even if no one had taught them directly. And when it was their turn to pass it on, they did the same. They didn't write it down. They didn't explain in detail. They handed over a bowl, folded a cloth, and hoped their daughter would figure it out. Next, we'll see how medieval women used makeup and scent not for beauty, but to cover fatigue and mask the parts of hygiene they couldn't fully manage. Without formal instruction, most women simply learned hygiene by observation and habit. But even when they did their best with water, cloth and herbs, there were still days when it wasn't enough. Life was hard, work was constant, sleep was limited, and bathing was rare. So when all else failed, many women turned to something else entirely. They covered what they couldn't fix. Through colour, powder, and scent, they found small ways to hide fatigue and control how they appeared to others. Makeup in medieval times wasn't about fashion or creativity. It was a tool, a way to look less tired, less dirty, and more composed in front of others. Women weren't trying to stand out. They were trying not to be noticed for the wrong reasons. Pale skin, smooth cheeks, and clean scent gave the impression of order. That impression mattered, even if it wasn't entirely honest. One of the most common products used was face powder. Some women used finely ground flour or chalk. Others, especially in noble households, used white powder made from lead. It was applied with a cloth or the fingers, smoothed across the forehead, nose, and cheeks. The goal was to make the skin look pale and even. Pale skin was linked to refinement. A woman who worked outside had darker skin, so a paler appearance signalled status and protection from the sun. Lead powder was easy to find in markets and from local apothecaries. It clung to the skin and didn't wash off easily, which was seen as a benefit, but it came at a cost. Over time, it damaged the skin. Women developed sores, discoloration, and peeling. Still, they used it, often unaware of the danger or simply lacking safer alternatives. Personally, if my choices were between looking rested and risking a face full of sores, I might just choose to stay tired. Along with powder, women added colour to their cheeks. This wasn't done every day, and it depended on what they had access to. A common method involved rubbing beet juice or juice from boiled radish onto the skin. It left a reddish tint that mimicked natural blush. Some women made pastes from crushed berries or used wine. These homemade mixtures were applied sparingly. A little colour on the cheeks made the face look warmer and more awake. Lip colour was used less often, but it did exist. One method was to mix red clay with animal fat, creating a soft paste that could be dabbed on the lips. It gave a muted red tone and helped prevent chapping. Like other beauty practices, this was not about glamour. It was about making the face look alive, even after days of work, mist baths, or poor sleep. These days, we debate whether makeup should be matte or dewy. In the past, the main concern was whether it would hide 3 weeks of exhaustion. Scent played a large role in these routines. Since full bathing was rare, women found other ways to manage body odour. Perfume as we know it didn't exist, but scented oils and powders did. Some women rubbed a few drops of oil behind their ears, on their wrists, or inside the collar of their chemise. These oils were made from pressed flowers, herbs, or animal glands. Lavender, rose, and rosemary were common floral scents. Musk and civet were also used, though more often by the wealthy. These came from animal sources and had a heavy, lasting smell. Not everyone liked them, but they helped cover natural body scent for longer periods. Scented cloths were another method. Small squares of fabric were soaked in herbal oils and kept in pockets or sleeves. When needed, a woman could hold the cloth to her face or tuck it inside her bodice. These cloths absorbed sweat and provided a temporary barrier against smell. Hair was also scented when possible. Some women rubbed oil into their braids or sprinkled ground herbs into their combs. This didn't make the hair cleaner, but it made it more pleasant to be near. In crowded homes or gatherings, these small efforts helped avoid embarrassment. Noble women had more access to these materials. They received gifts of perfume, powders, and oils from visitors or merchants. Their servants prepared mixtures using imported ingredients. But even poor women found ways to adapt. They hung bunches of dried herbs near the bed. They crushed petals into oil. They used vinegar mixed with mint as a rinse. It's a little funny that while medieval people feared the dangers of bathing, they had no problem rubbing unknown powders and animal grease on their faces. Women rarely talked openly about these routines. Makeup was sometimes frowned upon, especially by religious leaders who saw it as vanity. But in practice, it was widespread. Most people understood that a little powder or scent helped a woman move through the world without drawing unwanted attention. It wasn't about pride, it was about protection. Makeup also had a practical role in courtship and marriage. A woman who looked healthy and clean had better chances of finding a partner or maintaining her position. This was especially true in noble circles, where appearance reflected on the whole family. A tired or pale face might be seen as a sign of weakness. A faint scent of flowers could signal care and respectability. There were no mirrors in most homes. Women applied powders and oils by feel, using habits passed down from older relatives. They didn't see the full effect, only how others reacted, a kind smile, a compliment, or simply the absence of a negative comment. Over time, these practices became part of everyday life. Not every woman used them, but most knew about them. They weren't seen as indulgent. They were tools, just like a comb or a cloth. Another step in the quiet, constant work of caring for the body with limited means. Even when bathing became more common in later centuries, many of these habits stayed. Powder, scent, and tint remained a part of the morning routine. The reasons changed, but the actions stayed familiar, and for medieval women, those small touches made all the difference. Next, we'll explore how medieval women cleaned their mouths and teeth, even without toothpaste, brushes, or dental care as we know it today. While powders and perfumes helped medieval women manage what others could see and smell, they still had to deal with the parts of hygiene that came from within. One of the most overlooked aspects was oral care. Even without modern dental tools, toothpaste, or professional guidance, women still had to find ways to keep their mouths clean and their breath bearable. They managed this with simple items, consistent effort, and a good amount of quiet improvisation. There were no toothbrushes in the modern sense. Instead, women used small cloths or soft twigs. The twigs were usually taken from trees like willow or hazel. These types of wood were chosen because they were flexible, fibrous, and gentle enough not to damage the gums. One end of the twig would be chewed lightly until it frayed into soft fibres. Then it was rubbed against the teeth to remove food and build-up. The process was basic, but effective enough for daily maintenance. Cloth was another common tool. A strip of clean linen was wrapped around a finger and used to scrub the surface of the teeth and the inside of the cheeks. This method allowed for a bit more control, especially for women who didn't have access to suitable wood or lived in areas without those trees. The clothes were rinsed after use and hung to dry, and were often used repeatedly until they wore out. Personally, if I had to choose between chewing a tree branch and rubbing my gums with a rag, I'd probably end up doing both and calling it a day. Since there was no toothpaste, women relied on what they had. Salt was widely used. It helped scrape away build-up and acted as a mild disinfectant. Some women dipped their twig or cloth in dry salt before scrubbing. Others dissolved it in warm water and used the mixture as a rinse. The salty flavour wasn't pleasant, but it was familiar. Ashes were also used. Wood ash from clean fires was sifted and mixed with a bit of water to make a gritty paste. This acted as a natural abrasive, helping remove stains and food residue. It was harsher than salt and sometimes irritated the gums, but many people believed it kept the teeth whiter. Another option was dried sage. Sage was known for its antibacterial properties and strong flavour. Leaves were dried, ground into powder, and rubbed directly onto the teeth or mixed with a little vinegar or water. The result was a sharp, bitter taste that left the mouth feeling cleaner. Some women also chewed fresh sage leaves, letting the oils coat their teeth and tongue before spitting them out. These days, people choose between mint, cinnamon, and bubblegum flavours. Back then, it was salt, smoke, or whatever plant grew near the door. Mouthwash, in a basic form, did exist. A simple rinse made from wine or white spirits was used to freshen the mouth and fight odour. To make it more effective, women added herbs, rosemary, mint, and thyme were boiled with water and mixed into the alcohol. The mixture was kept in small bottles or ceramic jars and used sparingly. A small sip, a few swishes, and then either swallowed or spat out, depending on preference and availability. Some believed these rinses could cure illness. They were said to cleanse the mouth, balance the humours, and prevent bad air from entering the body. Whether that was true or not, the herbs made a difference in breath, and the alcohol kept things from spoiling. There were no flossing tools. Women used their fingernails or the tips of small twigs to dislodge food stuck between their teeth. In wealthier homes, toothpicks made from bone or metal were sometimes available. These were kept with grooming kits and carried in small leather pouches or wooden boxes. The appearance of teeth varied depending on diet, status, and hygiene habits. Peasants who ate more grains and vegetables often had better teeth than nobles, who consumed more sugar, wine, and soft foods. Tooth decay did happen, but slowly. Without processed foods or candy, the build-up was different. Gum disease, however, was common. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, and chronic pain were part of aging for many women. To ease discomfort, some women chewed on cloves or placed warm cloth soaked in herbal water against their cheeks. Others used honey mixed with herbs to coat painful spots. These remedies were not cures, but they offered temporary relief. If a tooth needed to be removed, it was pulled without medicine. That job fell to whoever was willing, often a family member or village healer. Despite the difficulty, many women took pride in keeping their mouths presentable. Clean breath mattered, especially in social or religious settings. No one wanted to be whispered about during mass or gossiped about at market. Even without mirrors, a woman could feel when her mouth wasn't right. She could taste the sourness or feel the grime. That was enough to push her into action. Children learned by watching. They saw their mothers chew on sage or rinse with herb wine. They were handed small twigs, shown how to chew and rub. The habit stuck. There was no praise for doing it well, but not doing it at all could lead to quiet judgment from others. Servants were often responsible for preparing these rinses and grinding herbs. In noble homes, a lady's maid kept track of powders and cloths. But even among the wealthy, there was no escaping the fact that oral care was unpleasant and mostly improvised. People did what they could with what they had. It's a little funny that medieval people feared bathing for opening their pores, but had no problem rubbing ashes directly into their mouths every morning. The idea of smiling to show white teeth didn't exist. A neat mouth was the goal, not a shining one. As long as the breath was tolerable and the teeth not visibly black, a woman was considered clean enough. Looking back, their methods were rough, but they were consistent. That consistency made a difference. Salt, cloth, twigs, and herbs. Day after day. Not glamorous, not perfect, but enough to carry on. Next, we'll look at how women cared for their most sensitive areas using nothing more than herbal water, rags, and a few careful tricks passed down through generations. After taking care of their teeth and breath with cloths, herbs, and rinses, medieval women still had one more part of hygiene that required attention and care, though it was rarely spoken about. The intimate areas of the body were treated with the same combination of practicality and silence as everything else. There were no special products, no ready-made bottles, no guidance from doctors, Just plants, cloth, and whatever a mother or grandmother had once whispered. Most women cleaned their genital area using warm herbal water. This wasn't a full bath, and it didn't involve soaking. Instead, they prepared small amounts of water infused with common herbs and used a cloth to wipe or dab gently. Two of the most trusted herbs were mugwort and Vietnamese balm. These plants were valued for their scent and their supposed healing properties. Mugwort was believed to ease irritation. Vietnamese balm was used for freshness and comfort. The herbs were usually dried and kept in bundles. When needed, they were boiled in water for a few minutes, then left to cool. The liquid was strained and poured into a ceramic bowl or small basin. A cloth was dipped in, wrung out, and used to gently clean the outer area. This was done privately, usually while squatting over the bowl or sitting on a low stool. It was not done quickly or in public. This part of the body was seen as private and even sacred in some beliefs, but also as something that needed to be controlled. Personally, I think that sitting over a steaming bowl of mugwort water sounds more like a ritual than a routine, but I'd still rather do that than go weeks without cleaning anything. Women avoided using their bare hands for this task. Even when privacy allowed for undressing, they still preferred clothes. Using hands was seen as improper, especially for unmarried women or girls. It was also believed that touching too much might lead to illness, infertility, or moral weakness. These were not scientific ideas. They were folk beliefs, repeated over generations, tied to modesty and superstition. Because of this, women kept specific clothes for intimate care. These were smaller, softer, and used only for this purpose. Afterward, they were washed separately and dried out of sight. In poor households, a single cloth might be reused for months. In wealthier homes, they were changed more often. Either way, the cloth was never shared. There were no commercial feminine washes, no scented gels or cleansing foams. Everything came from herbs, clean water, and old habits. Some women added salt or vinegar to the wash water, believing it helped prevent infections. Others used chamomile or yarrow. What mattered most was routine. Skipping this step for too long led to discomfort, odour, or fear of judgment. These days, entire supermarket aisles are filled with intimate care products. Back then, all you needed was a boiled leaf and a clean cloth. Girls learned these routines slowly. Most were not told directly. Instead, they watched their mothers or older sisters prepare the herbal water and disappear behind a curtain. At some point, a girl would be handed a cloth and shown where the herb bundles were kept. Nothing was written, nothing was explained in full. It was just expected that she would do the same. In colder months, preparing warm herbal water was harder. Firewood was scarce. Water was slow to heat. Still, women made the effort. The discomfort of cold wash water was better than the feeling of not being clean. In warm weather, the herbs were more accessible, and the whole process felt easier. For some women, especially those living alone or with limited resources, even this form of hygiene was difficult. Without someone to teach or help, they had to guess. Some skipped the practice altogether and relied on wiping with dry cloths. Others tried to keep clean with plain water. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. Smell was always a concern. Without regular washing, odour builds up quickly, especially during menstruation or illness. Herbal water helped. Some women also wore small sachets of dried herbs tied to their waist or tucked into their chemise. These didn't stop the odour, but they helped mask it slightly. The clothes themselves were stored carefully. Most women had a small box or wrapped bundle hidden among their personal items. These cloths were never used for other parts of the body. Reusing rags for general wiping or cleaning the house was common, but not in this case. This part of hygiene had its own tools, however simple. There was also fear attached to this kind of care. Some women believed that if they cleaned too often, they might disturb the natural balance of the body. Others were told that cold herbal water could harm fertility. Whether these ideas came from local midwives, older relatives, or travelling healers, they were taken seriously. But in spite of all the limits, women found ways to manage. They stuck to routines, adjusted by season, and paid attention to what made them feel right. Clean didn't mean sterile, it meant fresh enough to go about your day without discomfort or shame. It's a little funny that for all the shame and secrecy surrounding female hygiene, the only thing standing between women and infection was a pot of boiled weeds. Midwives sometimes gave advice. In villages, they were the closest thing to health authorities. They might recommend certain herbs for itching, others for after childbirth, and some for daily care. Their knowledge varied, but many women trusted them more than any priest or physician. Noble women followed similar routines but with more help. A maid might prepare the herbal water, bring clean cloths, and wait outside while the lady took care of herself. Still, the process was quiet, hidden, and not discussed. No one asked about it. No one described it openly. But most women did it, in some form or another. It was part of staying comfortable, part of being able to sit with others, pray at church, or sleep through the night without distraction. Looking back, it's clear how much women relied on their own discipline to maintain intimate hygiene. There were no reminders, no products, no schedules, just memory, habit, and the quiet pressure of knowing that being clean, even a little, made everything else more bearable. Next, we'll see how women managed to hide body odour throughout the day, using subtle tricks that fit into their clothing and daily movements. Even with herbal water, careful wiping, and regular routines, there were still days when women didn't feel fully clean. Medieval life involved physical work, heavy clothing, and shared spaces. Sweating was constant, bathing was rare, and most people lived close together. In that environment, body odour became something women couldn't eliminate completely, but they could try to manage, and most of them did, not by changing their bodies, but by learning how to mask the smell. The most common tool was a scented cloth. Many women carried a handkerchief or small square of linen soaked in oil or crushed herbs. This cloth was folded and tucked into a sleeve, belt, or carried in the hand. When the scent of sweat or smoke felt overwhelming, the cloth could be held to the nose or rubbed lightly on the skin. It didn't remove odour, but it distracted from it long enough to get through a conversation or a public gathering. These handkerchiefs were usually treated with rosemary oil, rosewater, or lavender. The scent came from herbs grown in gardens or collected in fields. The clothes were made at home and refreshed as needed. In wealthier households, they might be made of finer fabric and stored in small decorative cases, but the function was the same for all women. Personally, I think I'd need more than one scented cloth if I had to live in layers of wool without bathing for 2 weeks. Another method was to wear small herbal pouches. These were tiny bags sewn from scrap fabric and filled with dried herbs or crushed flowers. They were tied with a string and hung inside the bodice or around the waist. Some were worn near the chest, others near the hips. The idea was simple. The pouch released scent close to the body, covering or blending with natural smells. Common herbs used in these pouches included sage, thyme, lavender, and mint. Some women added cloves or dried orange peel when available. These combinations were chosen not just for their fragrance, but because many were believed to ward off illness. If a woman could not prevent body odour, she could at least feel like she was protecting herself from disease. These days, we spray perfume and walk into clouds of mist. Back then, women wore little pockets of dried salad just to feel socially acceptable. Layering clothing was another key strategy. Women wore multiple garments, not only for warmth, but also to manage sweat and smell. The innermost layer, usually a linen shift or chemise, absorbed moisture and body oils. This layer was changed and washed more frequently than the outer garments. A clean shift helped a woman feel fresher and kept her dresses from becoming too soiled. Shifts were made of plain linen, easy to rinse and hang to dry. They were often the only piece of clothing washed weekly, depending on weather and access to water. Outer gowns, coats, or aprons were brushed or aired out, but rarely washed. They were heavy, expensive, and slow to dry. Instead of cleaning them, Women protected them by keeping the underlayers as clean as possible. When a woman felt her shift was too damp or smelly to wear, she changed it, even if that meant using her only spare. In wealthier homes, ladies had multiple shifts and access to servants who could wash and press them. In poorer homes, 1 or 2 shifts had to last through the whole season. Clothing also helped trap scent. A well-wrapped shawl or thick apron could keep smells close to the body and away from others. This wasn't ideal, but it worked well enough for short trips to the market or church. Some women wrapped cloths around their necks or wrists, places where sweat tended to linger. Others lined their bodices with sprigs of dried herbs. Men also smelled, often more than women, but women were judged more harshly. A woman who smelled too strongly might be seen as careless, unclean, or sinful. So even when they couldn't control the scent, many women tried to appear like they had. They stood at a distance. They spoke softly. They limited movement to avoid drawing attention to the odour. Smell was also tied to class.